Hi, friends. So I wanted to share with you Cindy Sheehan's recent post about Nancy Pelosi and her recent admission that she knew about that George W. Bush was lying about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And she didn't say anything. And this is Cindy Sheehan, who is an anti-war activist. You may remember her from the George W. Bush era, where her son, Casey Sheehan, was killed not long after going to Iraq. He was a soldier. He was a soldier in the Iraq War not long after it started, and he was killed shortly after he arrived there in battle. And she became an anti-war activist after that, and she's pretty amazing, Cindy Sheehan. So she said, this is the title of her essay, Imprison Pelosi for War Crimes, the continuing saga of the International Evil Clown Show by Cindy Sheehan. The International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, which followed World War II, called the waging of aggressive war, quote, essentially an evil thing to initiate a war of aggression, is not only an international crime, it is a supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated war evil of the whole. Back in 2009, President-elect Barack Obama was asked by George Stephanopoulos if prosecuting the Bush regime for war crimes was in the cards, and while rejecting that idea, he had this to say about investigating torture and the unnecessary deaths of over 1 million people in Iraq, end quote. Obama held, quote, a belief that we need to look forward as opposed to looking backwards, end quote. I paraphrase Obama's comment at the time as, quote, I cannot prosecute the former commander-in-chief because I need the same professional courtesy from the one who will follow me, end quote. Of course, after committing many such atrocious war crimes and crimes against humanity while U.S. President himself, my conjecture at his motives were unfortunately pretty on target. My hypothesis then was based not on a tarot card or tea leaves reading, but the reading of past U.S. history. Even though the office of POTUS is riddled with thugs and war criminals, some massive, some not so massive but still horrible, not one U.S. president has been held accountable. I posted an article last week that I authored about the impeachment circus centering around House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and a newfound zeal for the rule of law and the U.S. Constitution in prosecuting the Trump regime, and one of the questions I asked was, why? Why was she now such a, quote, warrior goddess of the U.S. Constitution, end quote, when she refused to institute an investigation against the blatant war criminal George W. Bush? Well, recently at a CNN town hall meeting she appeared on, to my delight, an audience member asked him this very question. Her answer, and she gives a link to that, and I've actually posted that just 2 or 3 days ago when it happened. I posted that particular town hall question and Nancy Pelosi's response, so you can see that. I might even put it in here.
So, Speaker Pelosi, you resisted calls for the impeachment of President Bush in 2006 and President Trump following the Mueller report earlier this year. This time is different. Why did you oppose impeachment in the past? And what is your obligation to protect our democracy from the actions of our president now?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the question about, because when I became Speaker the first time, there was overwhelming call for me to impeach President Bush on the strength of the war in Iraq, which I vehemently opposed. And I said at other places, that was my wheelhouse. I was intelligence. I was the ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, even before I became part of the leadership of Gang of Four. So I knew there were no nuclear weapons in Iraq. It just wasn't there. They had to show us, they had to show the Gang of Four all the intelligence they had. The intelligence did not show that that was the case. So I knew it was a misrepresentation to the public. But having said that, it was in my view, not a ground for impeachment. They won the election, they made a representation, and to this day, people think that that it was the right thing to do. If people think that Iraq had something to do with 9/11, I mean, it's appalling what they did. But I did, and I said, if somebody wants to make a case, you bring it forward.
Her answer was long, rambling, and at times incoherent. And that's pretty much typical of Nancy Pelosi. But basically, her answer boils down to, quote, "Look, I was the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee before the war, and we knew that Saddam had no weapons of mass destruction," end quote. Then she went on to mock people who, quote, "still believe," end quote, that Iraq had anything to do with 9/11. So right there on national TV, without an ounce of shame or remorse, she admitted to being an accomplice of the Bush regime in war crimes and crimes against humanity. I'm not an attorney or legal scholar, but I do know that there is no statute of limitations on murder, and maybe a new wing should be added to Fort Leavenworth prison to incarcerate every war criminal, Democrat or Republican, who lied about this mass murder. Over 1 million Iraqis were killed in that war crime, with several million more being displaced or maimed. Babies are being born with deformities, and children are dying from cancer at an alarming rate due to the introduction of depleted uranium and other war toxins into that country by the U.S. military and its profiteers. This person, Pelosi, and everyone else who was complicit in these war crimes, including Secretary of State and noted war criminal Colin Powell, who is now calling for Republicans to, quote, "do the right thing," end quote, and remove Trump from office, should be rotting in federal prison at the very least. I would like war criminal and apparent sociopath Pelosi to think about what she did and continues to do during this holiday season, being the, quote, "good Catholic," end quote, that she claims to be. Not only did her lies and cover-up of the truth decimate Iraq, with the crimes continuing to this day, almost 5,000 U.S. troops, including my son Casey, were killed, with many more being wounded, and about 8 Afghan veterans committing suicide every day to this day. Unforgivably, Pelosi is prospering and has her crime family intact, and she doesn't have to go buy poinsettias for her son's grave this holiday season. My son Casey was a vibrant, loving human being who did always try to do the right thing. The last time we physically saw him was Christmas of 2003, and he told everybody that he quote, "he didn't want to go to Iraq, but he had to," end quote. And he was certain that he couldn't, quote, "kill anybody," end quote, and he was killed in combat very shortly after he arrived. Pelosi could have stopped this, slowed it down, or ameliorated the damage if she weren't such an A+ member of the heinous U.S. War Establishment. With the authority of being the, quote, "ranking member," end quote, of the House Intelligence Committee, she could have credibly made the case against war, but she knowingly and with malice, aforethought, chose not to. You will notice that Pelosi has been a fundamental player in U.S. politics for several decades and in a leadership role for many of those years. POTUS administrations come and go, but Pelosi seems to be forever. One can argue that Pelosi is not a, quote, "major player," end quote, in U.S. scandals, but I think the facts belie this. She is able to accumulate power through her wealth and longevity, and I don't think anyone should underestimate her political cleverness, even if she's not very articulate at times. Pelosi openly admitted this on national TV, and it makes me wonder about all the crimes she hasn't confessed to. Pelosi and her ilk are drenched in the blood and gore of millions, but now she is going ahead with the impeachment of Trump for not selling weapons to the neo-Nazis in Ukraine fast enough, weapons that are used to murder their opposition, for appealing to a Ukrainian official for the investigation of a Democrat, Joe Biden, who was a member of a regime that helped to install those neo-Nazis in Ukraine in the first place, and for using his influence as vice president to get his son a very lucrative job. In a different place or time, maybe Pelosi's administration would be monumental and proceedings would be instituted to hold those responsible accountable. But face it, we live in an era of soundbite worship of wealthy war criminals, but only we can prevent this from going down the memory hole with many other truly significant things. The antics of the clowns in Congress and let's never forget the devious role of their minions in the corporate media, would be amusing if they weren't so much at stake with their monumentally vicious crimes, the crimes of aggressive and preemptive war.
Well, here it is, Casey's grave on today, his birthday and Memorial Day. And like I said in a piece I wrote called For Our Freedom and Other Stuff, this cemetery in Vacaville hosts a Memorial Day event every Memorial Day. And the first Memorial Day after Casey was killed, which would have been almost 2 months after, I was an honored guest at that commemoration. And ever since I started speaking out against the wars and against the U.S. government, I haven't been invited back. Well, apparently today there was one where Casey's father, my ex-husband, was invited to speak, and my children and grandchildren all went, and of course I didn't know about it. I probably wouldn't have gone even if I did know about it, because I commemorate Casey's sacrifice in other ways besides actually going to things or supporting things that glorify war and glorify these sacrifices as something holy instead of something unholy, and instead of something that is evil, unnecessary, illegitimate, immoral. These wars that our young people fight in and kill other people and get killed themselves are nothing but for profit. As Medley Butler said back in the 30s, the 1930s, war is a racket. It's perhaps the oldest and most profitable racket. And that's why they continue, and that's why our young people are force-fed this load of nationalistic bullshit. And so, of course, I wasn't invited to the thing that commemorated my son, and on his birthday, again, I wouldn't have gone anyway, but my oldest granddaughter came to my house afterwards. She's 7, and she said, "Gigi, why weren't you there?" My grandkids call me Gigi. And I said, "Why wasn't I where, honey?" And she said, "At the cemetery, Pop gave a speech about Uncle Casey." And Pop is my ex-husband, their grandpa. And she goes, "Did you have to work?" I said, "No, honey, I didn't know about it, for one thing. And secondly, I don't go to those things that make war look glamorous and good." And she said to me, "If war is so bad, why did Uncle Casey go?" And of course, that's the question of the ages. Our young people are not given very many choices or opportunities. Casey wanted college money, and I explained that to her, and she said, "Well, I'm never going to go to war, and I'd rather not have money or go to college than to go to war." And obviously that was a good answer, and that's the answer that we need to give, is that until these wars are made unprofitable, until capitalism is crushed in this country, until the two-party system is totally abolished and made irrelevant, the war party of the Democrats and Republicans will keep sending our young people to fight and die in their wars for profit. It's unconscionable and unacceptable, and I'm here because it's Casey's birthday. I don't come as often as I used to. I used to come every day. It was a good place for me to collect my thoughts and to meditate when he was first killed. Now I know that he's not here. His bones are here. And I know that his spirit, I will carry his spirit on in trying to work for an end to the empire that killed him, an end to war profiteering, an end to capitalism, which is such a diseased system of repression, oppression, war, where it's been said so often, the rich profit and the poor die for their profit. Very few benefit from war. And these gross displays of nationalism, the flag, the bloody rag of empire. Somebody put another flag on his grave. After I'm done videotaping, I'll remove the flags. This is my son. I don't give permission for them to put these gross nationalistic displays of U.S. imperial adventurism. I don't give them permission to put them on my son's grave. And I have said this over and over. Right here used to be a sticker that indicated that Casey is a veteran, which he never was a veteran. Veterans are people who leave service. Casey was killed in action during a war. Casey's not a veteran. To set the record straight, Casey didn't support the wars. He didn't want to kill anybody, but that's not an option or a choice that our troops can make. At least Casey resisted the brainwashing of thinking the people of Iraq were his enemy. It's been over 13 years since he was killed, and I can sit here and talk without breaking down in tears, but it's very hard. And I just want all the young people in our country to know to join the resistance against this empire. Support people in other countries who are actively resisting active bombings and occupations by the United States of America. Young people, join that resistance. Being a soldier doesn't pay very well, and if you live long enough, it certainly is hard to obtain any of the benefits that they promise you, and those benefits aren't that great anyway. So, like my granddaughter said, she'd rather not have money than go to a war, and I'd rather have Casey sitting on my couch for the rest of his life playing Xbox than actually thinking that he had a future, where he had opportunities, where he could get a good job, go to college without going into debt for the rest of his life, get a good, meaningful job with good pay and good benefits, raise a family in a peaceful country. That was Casey's only crime. He thought he could have more than his working class station in life offered him here in this terrible empire.